How's it going, you guys? I always ask that and you never answered. Talk to me. It's lonely here. We're going to be talking today about what to do, how to think, where to go when your senior role becomes unsustainable. And this is a really interesting topic that actually kind of ended up having some fingers for me that I want to explore in future episodes. As a reminder, I have another podcast, The Exclusive Career Coach, which is focused on job search related issues, all things job search. Last week's episode was on places to network you haven't thought of. I have provided a pretty comprehensive list of places and people. Some are obvious, but most of them are not obvious. And then I also talk about the benefits and really necessity of networking throughout your career, not just when you're looking for your next job. So building that network and maintaining it so that it's there for you when you need it. And in the meantime, who knows what might come out of that network for you and for the other person in the meantime. My name is Lisa Edwards. I am the CEO of The Exclusive Career. And this podcast is all about executive leadership, development, competencies, and those kind of things. For this episode today, I pulled heavily from a Harvard Business Review article from January of this year. The hypothesis of that article was that the recent advice for addressing executive burnout has been to build greater resilience. But they argue that that ability to adapt to adversity breaks down when adversity becomes the norm. So I think there's a huge difference between building resilience for something that you are going through that has an end in sight, the company is going through, your boss, whatever it may be, that it is temporary and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel versus this is the way it is, and you have to build resilience against what you're dealt and what you get to continue to deal with. The way that I think about this is your job is a marathon with the occasional sprint required. If you think about a marathon, we pace ourselves. You pace yourself. I don't run marathons, but I know enough to know what happens. You take care of yourself throughout that marathon. You take breaks when needed, and then after the marathon, you don't start another one immediately. You give yourself a fairly significant amount of time to heal, recoup what your body lost, and you have self-care in between. But with a sprint, you run full out the entire time, but for a shorter distance. The problem is when you treat your job like a sprint instead of a marathon. It is a marathon. You will be continuing to deal with things. And if you have to do it at that kind of high level, all, full out, you're going to have problems. And what I see in my practice is when people come to me at that senior level and they are experiencing burnout, they're experiencing perhaps a misalignment. And I am going to cover that in a separate issue, the difference between burnout and misalignment. They lose perspective on what the problem is. They don't know whether they should sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is not the job for me. This is not the industry for me. I want to pivot and go do, I don't know, something completely different. I'm considering early retirement. Those are the kind of things that they talk about. They're confused. They don't have perspective. And we often talk about in the coaching industry that it's very difficult to read the label of the bottle that you're in. And I know I've used that phrase on both of my podcasts before, but it's that ability or that inability, rather, to see, to have the perspective, to look at your situation and be able to tell what the problem is. Another reason that career coaches can be extremely helpful. There's a little plug. Deloitte reports that nearly 70% of C-suite executives are seriously considering leaving their roles for the sake of their well-being. So I'm going to say that again, let that sink in. 70% of C-suite executives are seriously considering leaving their roles for the sake of their well-being. This is a Deloitte report. Gartner found that more than half expect to exit within 2 years, and over 25% are considering leaving within 6 months. So that's a huge potential drain on companies. And so, whether or not your particular company is attending to this senior level burnout or not, if they are not, this is a specifically an especially useful podcast for you. That article in the Harvard Business Review states that what these burnout executives need is a personal retention plan. And I've never used that phrase before, but I love it. And I really embraced the concept because I have worked on the pieces of it with clients, just never calling it this. But it's a way to reset an executive's daily actions so that they can stay in their job if they want to without suffering or sacrifice. So part of this, and I think this is important to say, part of this process has to be determining whether this is something you want to try to resolve, or do you really genuinely just want to leave? I want to give you a couple of examples. I don't know what magazine it was, but it was back in the day, Can This Marriage Be Saved, right? And there would be a therapist, and the husband would give his side of the story, the wife would give her side of the story, and then the therapist would say, blah, blah, and then they would kind of do an after action report. And it was always saved. They always figured out a way to save it. So I think the presumption there was that both of those people really wanted to stay in the marriage, or they would have gone to the therapy. On the other hand, I found myself back in, I don't know, 2011 in a very difficult work situation before I left higher education, where I had not nearly the tools that I have now to deal with something. I went to my boss. I was just told, no, I can't help you. You hired this problem. It's your problem. I didn't have the skill set to help me. And at the same time, I had started building my business, the earlier iteration of what this is now. And I was doing that on the side. And I recognized that I would have had to have given 100% of my attention to my job in order to solve this problem that I found myself in. And I didn't want to. I was excited about building my own business. That's where I wanted to put my energy. I didn't want to take my foot off the gas with that in order to solve the problem. And so I did end up retiring, supposedly, walking away from higher education. So part of this process has to be, is this something that, and we're going to have some questions around that. Is this good enough? Is this situation have enough upside that I want to at least give thought to trying to stay? The Harvard Business article, talking about this personal retention plan, talks about it as it's a way to realign your role so that it plays to your strengths, your purpose, your energy, all of those kinds of things. And the work of creating such a plan should be conducted outside the walls of your current organization because there are potential pitfalls if other people in your organization know that you are even considering departing. Secondly, you don't want to be seen as weak or unable to handle the workload. And then there might also be concern that whoever you talk to about this, your direct report, a mentor, whoever it is, a colleague, could also be considering departure. And that could color their input to you. It could, who knows what might be said to someone else, those kinds of things. So I'm not saying that you can't share this plan with your key stakeholders after it has been created. If that is something that once you've created this plan, you're like, I really want my boss to know, I really want this person to know, that's okay. But its main purpose is for you to reset your priorities and help you to find a path forward. This is a three-step process. And here's step number one. You want to understand what your role really requires. And as I was reading this Harvard Business Review article, I was really struck by this concept that, especially at the higher levels, sometimes job descriptions and the focus of a senior level job was created in a different era, right? Whether that's a different era in terms of technology, a different era in terms of the phase that the company was in, the market position of the company, whatever it may be. And if we don't look at those job descriptions periodically, we don't catch that the job description and the what a human being can sustainably provide or what needs to be provided is veering off. I've got some excellent questions for you here, and this is going to be another one where I'm going to say, hey, if you like the questions, you like the idea of going through this process, and maybe you want to tackle it on your own, grab these show notes so the questions are there for you. What is the most important problem my role must solve consistently? So here we're kind of pulling back the layers to see what's the biggest priority of this job. Is it above all else top line revenue? Is it above all else increasing market share? What is it? Next, why does that problem matter? And to whom does it matter? Next, and I love this question because I love new stuff and I love to break things down and put them back together again better. If I rebuilt this role from scratch, what would it look like? What would, and I think you want to look at this both from it's my role, and so I want it to play to my strengths and my passions and all those things we talked about, but we also want to look at it from the perspective of what's best for the company and what because then there's some negotiation room with those things that need to be done, but not necessarily by you. Next question, love this one. Where is the work over engineered? And what I mean by that is, are there processes, meetings, decision making workflows that have become super chunky, super complex, very bureaucratic, or very heavy for the value that they actually produce? So where think of it as there are bottlenecks, right? There is a place that is slowing everything down, making everything much more difficult than it needs to be. That is over engineered work. Here are some questions that you can ask around that over engineered work. Does this actually need my eyes? Or are we just following a legacy workflow that no longer serves us? Right? So that's a strategic skill set for a senior level executive to be able to step back and look at, does this even need to be done? And if it does it need me to do it? More on that. Next, move toward good enough or minimum viable documentation to reclaim hours of your work. So if there are things that are over engineered, can and not super important to the success of the organization or your particular role, can we go from best practices to good enough, minimum viable documentation? It gets the job done. And then from that, you can reclaim hours of your work week. Next, identify where quote unquote collaboration has turned into quote unquote over processing and cutting the guest list or the frequency of those syncs, right? So whether that's meetings and who needs to be in them, because presumably, and I like to think of it this, I was just working with a client yesterday whose boss, who is a C-suite executive, and she's her direct report, my client, she is said she wants to come to weekly status meetings for a project that they're doing. And we talked through the process that, okay, let's look at the dollar amount. I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, but let's talk about if we brought her salary, the chief executives, down to an hourly level, an hourly wage, brought yours down to an hourly wage, and the other people that directly report to you down to an hourly wage, how much money is going into this? And does she need to be there? Do we need to have them maybe less often? Looking at all of that with a critical eye and not just running business as usual. Next, so we talked about over engineered. Where is it? Where is my job? Where are my duties? Undervalued and under resourced. And this could also be the work of my department. A major a driver of unsustainability is this idea of here's these things you're supposed to do. We're not going to resource it. We don't particularly value the work, but you're expected to do it. What ends up happening oftentimes is that the senior executive, or if you've delegated it to someone, you end up overcompensating for those gaps. You spend more time, more energy, and more stress because you're trying to pick up the slack. There's not enough people to do it. There's not enough money. You're maybe having to kind of put things together with duct tape and, I don't know, WD-40. When you find a place like that that is undervalued or under-resourced within your sphere of influence, does that need a change in value perception? So is this a matter of this is really important and nobody seems to get it but us? So do I need to do a PR campaign as the leader to increase the value perception of this so that it will be resourced? Or is it something that really could be exited, delegated, something like that? So to do that, you want to think, and I just talked about this, quantify how many hours of level 10 leadership. So let's assume that you're at a level 10. If that's not true, what do you think you are? How many hours is being spent on this thing that is undervalued and resourced? And what level would you give that? So if you're a level 10, and you're giving hours to a level 6 tactical execution, you are wasting your time. And then you want to build that business case, use that data. And we talked about that, like the 50-hour task. Is this a $50 an hour task? Is this a $25 an hour task? Is this a task that could be outsourced? How can we get this off my plate? And when you speak to those above you about misallocating your expensive leadership capital, I think it resonates much more than saying, I'm tired. We're all exhausted here. And if the organization still doesn't value it, that's when you want to give yourself permission to produce that minimum viable product for that task. The other thing I want to say, and this is a tricky one and I know it, but when you consistently contribute your weekends, your evenings, your brain space away from work, if all you're doing is just thinking about it, you want to allow that lack of resources. If you're taking an inordinate amount of time to do this thing and you know it, you don't want to hide that because they will not resource it or do anything about it if they don't realize what it is taking. So you want to let those, you want to keep that to a minimum. Don't consistently contribute your weekends and evenings. Sometimes you have to, but you want that extra effort and really wasted effort to become visible to the CEO, to your board, direct boss, whatever's appropriate. And we've talked about this multiple times, but if you are under resourced in an area that you personally find draining, then you want to find someone else who can do that. If it must be done, and I love to think about this and I've talked about the Myers-Briggs framework before. I'm a master practitioner with that tool. Just because I don't like to do it, I find it draining. There is someone on my team, if I have hired a diverse team that will love to do that thing and will be better at it and will see it as the developmental opportunity that it is, and it gets it off of my plate. I also think this type of evaluation is important if you are considering seeking a promotion to the next level. One of the things that the article talked about that really got me stopped to think was if you're trying to get into the CEO level, CFO, one of the C suites, you may be looking at the incumbent in that role and thinking that's not the lifestyle I want. That person works every weekend. That person works 18-hour days. That person never takes a vacation. A strategic leader has the ability to say, I don't accept the status quo. And if the employer, if you are considered for that role, and the employer insists you're going to do it just like John did, you don't want to work there. You want to move on anyway. So that's step number one. Understand what your role really requires. Tell yourself the truth. Next, you really have to tell yourself the truth because step two is conducting an internal inventory. You want to determine what you really require. And I've got some questions for you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I personally care about the core problem this role solves? So we talked about in phase one, what is the problem? What is the main focus? How much do I really care about that? Next, how am I uniquely positioned to solve it? Next, what energizes me in my work? And then I always want to ask that in the next question, which is going to be about draining. What energizes me in my work and how much of my time on average do I get to spend in that energizing work? Next, what drains me consistently and how much time on average do I have to spend doing that draining work? And then finally, where is my superpower space? I call it the zone of genius. The work I do at my highest value and best use, and what percentage of my time am I currently spending in that space? So it's a slightly different question. The first one was, what energizes me in my work, which can be something very broad. And then what is my superpower space can be similar, but maybe more specific. Think about that. These questions really help you to think about the intersection of your work and your life to see where your strengths and values align or conflict. I never will forget till the day I go on when I was doing Myers-Briggs training for a YMCA when I used to live in Missouri. And they were doing the executive director had called me in to do this work because the assistant director was not living up to standards. And so she was putting him on a PIP and wanted to really feel as though she had given him every opportunity. And after they took the assessments ahead of time and we did some activities in the morning for them to confirm their personality type. And then we had some activities. And one of the activities was there was some flip charts around the room with a question and they were to go up and write their answer to the question. And one of the questions was, for me, work is a reflection of dot dot dot. And he wrote, for me, work is a reflection of who I am not. Wow, right? So there was little to no intersection for him with his strengths and values and the work that he was doing. So that's step two, that internal inventory with those kinds of questions. And then step three, I want you to journal your next steps, right? You want to come up, this is supposed to be a plan. So you got to have a plan out of all of this. And here are some questions for that. What matters most to me is, that's a broad question on purpose. What I want to keep the same about my role, what I want to protect, what I need to let go of. And by the way, those two questions, I love to think of them in the context of when you are moving from one job to the next. And I think of it as like we're going to take a suitcase with you and you're to your new job. What goes in that suitcase? Meaning that I love it, I do it here, I love it, and I want to keep doing it. What do I want to leave on the shelf for the next person? I don't need it. I'm ready to let go of it. And is there anything that isn't in my current world that I want to grab and put in that suitcase that would be new as I move forward? So we've got what matters most to me, what I want to keep the same about my role is, what I need to let go of is. The next question is the relationships I need to reset are. Next, the expectations I need to reset are. So, who are the people and what are those relationships that I need to think about differently? I can't change the other person, but I can think about them differently. I can decide what kind of a relationship I want that to be. I can wipe the slate clean and I can do whatever I want to. And the same thing with expectations. I don't have to think the same way that I've always thought about my job. I can choose to think differently. It's up to me. Next, the person I need to be to make this work is. Love that question. So again, those steps for creating a personal retention plan are step one, understand what your role really requires. So question the assumptions, question the status quo. Step two, conduct an internal inventory. Tell yourself the truth. And then step three, document your next steps, creating a plan of action for yourself. And I want to leave you with the idea that you may find that only small changes are needed for a huge difference. When we don't get granular about this, doing this process, we can tend to think one of two things. Either that's a big, huge thing and I need to run away from it, I need to leave this job because we haven't broken it down and really looked at it closely, or we kind of sweep it under the rug. That's no big deal. I shouldn't be bothered by that. That shouldn't disappoint me, whatever it is, put it under the rug. And eventually that rug gets pretty lumpy if we don't clean out from underneath it. So when you can figure out what are the shifts that are needed, what do I need to do differently? You may not even need to communicate any of that to anyone. You just begin implementing the changes. Or, as I said earlier, you can decide, hey, I want to let my boss know this little piece of it. I want to let the board know this piece of it. It's totally up to you. But the main purpose of this personal retention plan is for your eyes only. I hope this has been helpful. And I also hope this has been interesting. I always use the term food for thought often with these podcasts, but I think this one is a particularly good food for thought one. It really got me thinking about some new tools that I want to use with clients. So I think it's made me a better coach. I will see you back in 2 weeks on this podcast. I'll see you next week on the Exclusive Career Coach.